Hello, my name is Zhuoen. What I like most in reading, so today I chose this book called Gulliver in Lilliput by Tony Bradman and Tony Ross. Chapter-1. The Little People. Gulliver was a man who liked to travel. It wasn't just that he enjoyed visiting distant, exotic places. What he loved most was meeting new people and learning as much as he could from them. He went on many voyages and saw many and strange and wonderful things. And this is the story of his visit to the strangest, most incredible country of all. The voyage started well enough. Gulliver and his fellow explorer headed out for the South Seas, stopping to study plants or people wherever their mind took them. Then one night, the vessel ran into a storm and began to sink, but most of the crew was swept aboard while they were still trying to launch a lifeboat. Soon Gulliver found himself alone in the sea, desperately struggling to keep his head above the water until finally darkness swept over him. Next page. He was woken by the warm sun on his face and lazy sounds surf hissing over a reef. He had survived. He realized that the sea had dumped him on the beach and that he couldn't stand up. When he looked down, he saw that he must have tied down while he was asleep. Dozens of fine string attached to tiny pegs and sand crisscrossed his whole body. Gulliver raised his head to look, and to his astonishment, he saw a tiny person standing on his chest, looking backward at him. The little man was no taller than the toy soldier, and was holding a military bow and arrow in his tiny hands. Gulliver felt tickle movement on his legs and body. Before long, the little archer was joined by a dozen more like him. "I must be going mad," Gulliver murmured. Then he yelled, "Get off me!" and little archers screamed and ran for their life. Gulliver strained against his bonds and managed to get free. He instantly heard a stuck bushing noise and realized that the little archers were shooting at him. The tiny arrows prickled onto his hand and face like a hostile wasp sting. The pain told him he wasn't mad at all, which was quite confusing, and that was what happening all too real. He saw that now that there were 100 tiny people on the beach, the little archers were firing steadily at him, but the rest were fleeing panic, screaming at the tops of their tiny voices. Suddenly, Gulliver understood. To them, he was a giant, so it was hardly ever surprising they thought he might be a threat. How could they know he wouldn't hurt anyone, big or small? It also occurred to Gulliver that this was fantastic for him to learn. He had never encountered anything like these little people, and he had so much to ask them. Then a tiny arrow landed right on the end of his nose, and he realized he would have to make friends with them first. "Okay, you win," he said, smiling. "I promise I won't hurt you." Then he put down his arms again, making quite sure there were no tiny people under them to be crushed, and lay still. "Oh, yes, I surrender," he added. To Gulliver's great relief, the little archer stopped shooting, and the other overcame the fear and started to return. Within a few minutes, the beach was full of activity. All tiny people were hustling and bustling around him. They built a big trolley, winched Gulliver onto it and then harnessed dozens of tiny horses to one end. Soon he was being carried through a countryside of tiny hills and streams, tiny trees and hedges, and tiny fields with tiny cattle and sheep. There were even tiny villages full of tiny people who came out to gulp. Gulliver gulped back, enthralled. At last the trolley creaked to a halt, and there before Gulliver was an amazing sight. A perfect little city surrounded by a wall, the battlements full of tiny people yelling with excitement. Gulliver winched off the trolley and his bonds was removed, although not one before one of his middle ankles was chained to a large rock some distance from the city's gates. After a while, a column of tiny horsemen cattered out, all of them wearing shiny breastplates and helmets with nodding plumes. They formed two ranks facing each other, raised tiny trumpets, and blew a fanfare. Then tiny coach, drawn by four tiny white horses, emerged from the gateway and came to a halt. Two tiny footmen ran up to the open door, and a tiny man climbed out. He was wearing a tiny golden crown, lavish clothes, and fancy shoes with rather high heels. He had a little round tummy, short skinny legs, and a snooty expression on his face. Gulliver immediately guessed this was someone important indeed, though he does not know who he is. Although he couldn't help noticing the little man was very small indeed, even for an inhabitant of this country of tiny people.